Canada is absolutely furious with Donald Trump again, but this time it's not just about the usual nonsense. It's about how he handled himself at the G7 in Alberta and what he said after he left. While Canada went on to have a productive summit with other world leaders, Trump, in typical fashion, stormed out early. He ditched the meeting, got back on Air Force One, and flew home, but not before taking a few shots at Canada from the sky. During that flight back to Washington, Trump spoke to the press, and what he said left even his own people scrambling to explain it. Before we continue, click subscribe below. We don't sugarcoat, we don't protect politicians, we expose what others won't. Trump pulled out his favorite old line, the 51st state joke, and then claimed Canada should pay $71 billion for the Iron Dome defense system. No one really knows what he meant. Even his own defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, a former Fox News host now somehow running defense policy, couldn't explain what Trump meant. No one could. Watch this.
I think it's a much better deal from Canada, but it's up to them. They're going to have to pay a lot of tariffs and things. They're going to have to pay a lot of money for the dome, for the Iron Dome. They want to be a part of it. We may make a separate deal on that, by the way. We discussed that, with the dome. That may be a separate deal. They want to be at $71 billion. They're going to pay.
There could be a dome thing separate from the tariff.
They'll be in the dome. Yeah, they'll be under the dome.
Trump mistakenly referring.
Trump had previously mentioned $61 billion. Now it's $71 billion, with no explanation. This isn't negotiation, it's not leadership, it's just chaos. And it's exactly what Canada and much of the world was warned about before the G7 even started. So, how did Canada respond? Prime Minister Carney didn't waste time. He fired back with real consequences. And what he said next was a major turning point. Canada didn't just sit back and take it. Right after Trump made his comments on Air Force One, demanding $71 billion and pushing that 51st state nonsense, Prime Minister Mark Carney responded with real action. Carney's government announced a series of new measures aimed directly at US trade policies. They made it clear, if the US continues down this road, Canada's ready to hit back hard. The plan included adjusted counter tariffs on US steel and aluminum, reciprocal procurement rules, so only countries offering fair access to Canada get fair access in return. So here are the messages coming from Prime Minister Carney's government. Today, we announced new measures to protect our steel and aluminum business and workers, including adjusted counter tariffs, reciprocal procurement rules, and tariff rate quotas specifically on certain steel products. Canada's steel and aluminum industries are world-class, and they deserve a level playing field. While we work toward a deal with the US, we're taking strong targeted action to defend our workers, uphold fair trade, and build the strongest economy in the G7. And here's Prime Minister Carney saying that Canada is now imposing a deadline on Donald Trump, and then Canada will take significant action against the Trump regime. Here's Carney. Let's watch this.
In parallel, we must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present. And that's why we're announcing that Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers. And there's several, and I'm going to list them. First, Canada will adjust its existing counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum products on the 21st of July. At the end of that 30-day period, in other words, we're going to adjust them to levels consistent with the progress that's made at that point on the broader trading arrangements with the United States. Secondly, we will implement reciprocal procurement rules, ensuring that only Canadian producers and producers from trading partners that provide Canada with tariff-free reciprocal access through trade agreements can compete for federal government procurement of steel and aluminum.
And here's Prime Minister Carney responding to a question about the reciprocal tariffs and President Trump's behavior at G7 press conference. Watch this.
We're willing to sign a security and economic or commercial agreement with the United States that's in Canada's best interest, and only that. So that's the negotiation. That there is still some room to travel, so to speak, before we get to that point, but we have a deadline in order to achieve that, and if it's in Canada's interest, we'll sign it. If it's not, we won't.
So you're willing to sign a deal with the Americans and still have some of the tariffs that Donald Trump has signed still in place?
So it's a negotiation right now. I was anticipating the en français. Sorry, but yeah, it's a negotiation. We start from a position which is clear in terms of the tremendous contribution of Canadian workers, Canadian companies, first and foremost to jobs and livelihoods here in Canada, but to the competitiveness of the American, for example, specifically in the auto sector, where steel is and aluminum are so tightly tied, and our auto companies are so tightly tied. We are part of the core that makes American automakers competitive. It is in the U.S. interest as well. They have to fully see that. Thank you.
Let me also remind you, when Donald Trump arrived at the G7 in Alberta, he didn't waste time stirring the pot. He started praising Vladimir Putin, questioning the very idea of the G7, and pushing for it to become the G8 again. He went on about how much Putin loves him. Putin loves me. He only wants to talk to me. Those were his words. He also blamed Canada for why Putin was kicked out in the first place. That's right, not Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to Trump, it's all Canada's fault. Imagine a US president flying to the G7 just to attack Canada, praise Putin, and run. What would you call that? Put it in the comments. He also used the press event to attack Biden, slam blue states, and recycle the old line that the US is subsidizing Canada. What Trump didn't mention, that states like California, with an economy larger than most countries, actually subsidize the red states he likes to praise. So Donald Trump was behaving so disgustingly and such like a petulant child that Prime Minister Carney had to literally shut down that press conference and say, "I'm exercising my role as chair of the G7, and we're stopping this press conference now," because Trump was behaving awfully. Here, watch this clip.
All Democrat-run cities, and they think they're going to use them to vote. It's not going to happen.
That's it. Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to exercise my role, if you will, as G7 chair, since we have a few more minutes with the president and his team, and then we actually have to start the meeting to address some of these big issues. So
thank you. Thank you, media. Let's go. Thank you. That's it. That's it. Thank you very much. Out.
And back home, Canadian MP Charlie Angus didn't hold back. Watch this clip. Speaking from Oshawa, Ontario, a town built on auto jobs, Angus said what a lot of people were already thinking.
Hi, this is Charlie Angus. I'm here in Oshawa, Ontario. This is auto country. General Motors have been here since the 1930s, and this is the front line in Donald Trump's attempt to break the economy of Canada. So if there was ever a place that was hoping that we'd get a deal worked out at the G7 between Prime Minister Carney and Donald Trump, you'd think it would be here in Oshawa. But people in Oshawa are no dummies. They know that the word of a gangster can't be trusted. So let's just break down what happened at the G7 when Donald Trump came to town. Well, first off, he did what Donald always does. He made this vague promise that there would be a trade deal possible. And of course, all the media got all hopeful and thought that he was going to, become an adult and we'd all work it out and we'd become friends again. But Donald Trump is not our friend. He came to the G7 to insist that Vladimir Putin be allowed back into what was then the G8. And he falsely blamed Canada for kicking Vladimir Putin out. Vladimir Putin was kicked out because he invaded Ukraine. Donald Trump made falsehoods on behalf of Vladimir Putin. He came to deliver Vladimir Putin's agenda as a loyal sock puppet, and then he left the country because he didn't want to be in the same room with the real leader, President Zelensky. So again, we have Trump defending Russia, undermining Ukraine. Trump's reason for leaving, he said, was the situation in the Middle East. Now, normally, an American president would have used the G7 to show leadership, to be front on stage with the world's allies trying to de-escalate the situation. But Donald Trump doesn't see France, Germany, the UK, Canada as his allies. His allies are the gangsters, Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu. And in the situation in Iran, which is becoming a very, very, very dangerous dumpster fire lit by Benny Netanyahu, the president, the leader who believes in permanent war to stay ahead of his own courts, Donald Trump has now poured gasoline all over that act of arson, claiming that America will only accept unconditional surrender from Iran. Those are very, very provocative words. Those words were used in the Second World War to take down the Nazi regime and the militaristic government of Japan. There have been many historians who said that that language drove that conflict longer and led to many more casualties, and it led to the dropping of the atom bomb. So when Donald Trump says he's going to insist on unconditional surrender of the Iranians, that is a very dangerous provocation. And let's think about what he decided in making this decision. He ignored American intel. American intelligence said that Iran was not in the position or was making a nuclear bomb. But Benny Netanyahu needed a reason to bomb, and so Donald Trump sided with Netanyahu. And there's only one thing we can sense out of this, is that if Iran wasn't getting a bomb before, they're going to get one now. This is a very, very dangerous situation, and Donald Trump has set himself apart from his so-called allies and sided with the gangsters. But let's go back to Canada and this promise of a trade deal. Like all the other promises of a trade deal, there was, nice words, and then Donald Trump, when he went back to the safety of Mar-a-Lagos, or safety of Washington, said that Canada was going to face billions in tariffs unless we gave him what he wanted. And he said, or we could become the 51st state. So he's not backed off in his attack on Canada. He's not backed off in saying that we don't have a right to be a nation sovereign and independent. And he is continuing to use this trade talk to try and break us and to make us a vassal state of his gangster regime. It's not going to happen, Donald. This is the front line here in Oshawa. People are holding the line. They will not give in to you because they know that if you give in to a gangster, he's going to keep coming back for more. The situation, my friends, is very, very, very concerning around the world right now. We are holding together by a very fragile thread all over the world, but we see that the gangster regimes are out to light a fire that could bring us all down. So my message is hold the line, keep the boycott strong, stand up for Canada, defend our interests because we can't trust Donald Trump. To our Prime Minister, we need to work with our allies around the world because the Americans are no longer our allies. They are now a major threatening force. I'm Charlie Angus.
Charlie Angus warned us. Before the G7, he said it straight. Canada needs to stop pretending the US is our ally, because they're not. He told Carney, invite them if you must, but stop acting like we can still trust them. He saw it coming. Watch this.
Canada can no longer view the United States as an ally. We know that Donald Trump doesn't believe in liberal democracy. He doesn't believe in the rule of law. Canada is an open and inclusive society. Little wonder that Donald Trump has denounced our nation as one of the nastiest countries he's ever had to deal with. And we'd be fools to pretend that his threat to, quote, get rid of the border by using economic force is somehow abated. We can't kid ourselves about the threat that's being posed by Donald Trump. Prime Minister Mark Carney is not inviting our nearest neighbor and friendly ally to join us in the G7. Prime Minister Carney is not inviting the leader of the free world to Canada. He is welcoming in Vladimir Putin's sock puppet.
And it wasn't just Canada. Trump also skipped meetings with other leaders like Australia's PM Anthony Albanese, prompting outrage from allies across the Pacific. At one point, Trump was even asked about the AUKUS Defense Alliance, and he even didn't know what it means. Here, watch this.
We've been discussing AUKUS with the Australians and the Brits. Were you discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir?
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australia-US Defence Alliance.
Yeah, well, we'll be discussing that. We've had another great relationship, and you have too, with Australia.
Yeah.
We've had a very good relationship with Australia.
So tell me, how on earth can anyone be mad at the Labour Party or Prime Minister Anthony Albanese just because Donald Trump threw a tantrum and stormed off like a spoiled child? It wasn't just Albanese who got snubbed. Prime Minister Modi was ticked off. President Claudia Sheinbaum wasn't thrilled either. A whole lineup of world leaders showed up on Tuesday expecting serious talks. But instead of an adult in the room, they got a disappearing act. Classic Trump. When the going gets tough, he grabs his toys and goes home. We make these videos to spread the truth, even if only 1 out of 100 people finally wakes up. If that's a mission you believe in, hit like and subscribe. It helps us keep going, and it helps the truth reach the people who need to hear it most, because more people need to see what's actually happening. We're not just talking politics here, we're talking about global stability.